The evening was quiet, the kind of quiet that wrapped around the large mansion like a heavy blanket. The sound of the wind brushing against the tall glass windows was the only thing that moved through the air. Inside the house, the smell of polished wood and old books filled the hallways. Every corner looked expensive, every piece of furniture placed as if it had been measured by perfection itself. In the middle of this grand place worked a woman named Elena. She was not rich, not powerful, and certainly not noticed by most people who passed her by. She worked quietly, cleaning rooms, dusting old shelves, and making sure her employer's mansion looked perfect every single day. Her movements were careful, practiced, and almost invisible. That's how she liked it. Being invisible kept her safe. Her employer, Mr. Callahan, was one of the richest men in town. He was tall, confident, and carried an air of pride that made people nervous when he entered a room. Everything about him spoke of control. His clothes, his walk, even his voice. He liked things done his way at his time with no questions asked. The staff often whispered about how cold he was. He didn't smile much, and when he did, it never reached his eyes. Elena had been working in his mansion for 6 months. She had learned that silence was the best way to survive under him. If she did her job right, she could avoid his sharp tone and disapproving looks. Most days were quiet, though heavy with tension. That day, however, wasn't quiet. Mr. Callahan was hosting an evening party for some of his business partners. The mansion was filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the soft hum of conversation. Expensive perfumes mixed in the air, and the chandeliers reflected golden light across the wide room. Elena moved quietly through the guests, refilling glasses, clearing plates, and making sure everything was perfect. She could feel the weight of their glances as she walked past. People of wealth often looked at servants like they were furniture, things that existed to make their lives easier. Elena kept her head down, her hands steady, her steps soft. She had learned long ago that dignity didn't come from being seen. It came from doing your work with pride, even when no one noticed. Mr. Callahan stood near the fireplace, talking loudly to his guests. His laugh was deep but had no warmth. He liked to show off his art, his house, his wine. Everything was a reflection of his success. But tonight he seemed restless. Maybe he had already impressed everyone with his collection of paintings and his rare wine bottles. He looked around the room as if searching for something else to display. Then his eyes landed on the grand piano standing quietly in the corner of the hall. It was a beautiful instrument, polished, elegant, untouched for years. The lid was closed and a thin layer of dust sat on it like forgotten time. A smirk crossed his face. "Why don't we have some music?" he said loudly, clapping his hands once. "This room is too quiet." The guest turned toward him, smiling, waiting for some entertainment. One of them joked, "Do you play, Callahan?" He laughed, shaking his head. No. But I think one of my staff should. Let's see who among them has hidden talents." His eyes moved around the room and stopped on Elena. She froze. Her hand still held an empty tray close to her chest. "You," he said, pointing slightly. "You've been standing there long enough. Go on. Play something for us." The room went silent. Elena blinked, her heart starting to race. "Sir, I don't think I should—" "Oh, nonsense," Callahan interrupted with a wave of his hand. "It's just a bit of fun. Play us something. Anything." A few guests chuckled, their amusement sharp and uncomfortable. Elena's throat tightened. "Sir, I haven't played in years." That caught his attention. He raised an eyebrow. "So you can play?" "I used to," she said softly. "Well then," he replied, leaning back in his chair with a smug grin. "Let's see if you still can." The guests murmured in anticipation. Some smiled politely. Others leaned forward as if ready to be entertained by what they assumed would be a clumsy attempt. Elena stood frozen, her fingers gripping the tray so tightly her knuckles turned white. She wanted to disappear. Every part of her screamed that this was wrong. But refusing him would mean disrespect, and disrespect could cost her the only job she had. Slowly, she set the tray down on a nearby table. Her legs felt weak as she walked toward the piano. The sound of her shoes clicking against the marble floor echoed louder than the music that wasn't yet playing. She stopped in front of the piano and stared at it. The black and white keys looked like strangers now. She could see her faint reflection on the polished surface. Her hands hovered above the lid, trembling slightly. For a moment, she was no longer in the grand hall. She was back in her old home, a small apartment with peeling walls and the sound of laughter from her father as he watched her practice. The piano had been secondhand, but to her it was everything. Music had been her world once. Go on. Callahan's voice cut through the memory. Elena took a deep breath and lifted the lid. The keys waited silently. She sat down on the stool, the guests watching her every move. She placed her fingers on the keys. They felt cold, unfamiliar. She started with a simple note. It was shaky, thin. A few people exchanged glances, amused. Callahan smirked, clearly expecting a clumsy tune. But then she closed her eyes. She took another breath and let her fingers remember what her mind had forgotten. The next sound that came was different, stronger, smoother. Her hands began to move with rhythm, her body swaying slightly with the flow of the music. The melody grew richer, filling the room like sunlight spilling through windows. Conversation stopped. Glasses were set down. The laughter faded into silence. Every note carried a piece of her, years of pain, loss, hope, and the quiet strength she had built from struggle. The music was soft yet powerful, gentle yet full of emotion. It was not perfect in the technical sense, but it was real. The guests were spellbound. Even Callahan's confident expression faded. He leaned forward slightly, watching her with a look he hadn't worn in years, something close to wonder. Elena's fingers moved faster, lighter, freer. Her face softened, her eyes still closed as the music lifted her beyond the room. She wasn't a servant now. She wasn't invisible. She was a musician again, a woman who once had dreams, who once believed in beauty. When she finally stopped, the last note lingered in the air like a whisper that refused to fade. Then silence. No one moved. For a few seconds, the room was still, as if afraid to break the moment. Then someone began to clap softly. The others joined in. The applause grew louder, echoing through the hall. Elena opened her eyes. Her heart was racing, her breath uneven. She looked around, unsure what to do. She stood up, hands clasped together, head slightly bowed. Mr. Callahan didn't clap at first. He just stared at her. The smirk was gone. There was confusion on his face, maybe even respect, but it was hidden under layers of pride. Finally, he said quietly, "I didn't expect that." Elena said nothing. She simply nodded and turned to leave, but his voice stopped her again. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked, his tone more curious than commanding. Elena hesitated. "A long time ago, sir," she said softly. "Before I came here." He said nothing else. The guests soon returned to their chatter, but the energy in the room had changed. Some of them looked at her differently now, not as a servant, but as something more. Elena went back to her duties, her mind still swimming with the sound of the music. For a brief moment, she had remembered who she used to be, and for the first time in years, she felt alive. Upstairs in his private study, Mr. Callahan poured himself a glass of wine. But he wasn't thinking about his business or his money. His mind kept replaying the melody that woman had played. There was something in it, something raw and honest that made him feel uneasy, almost small. He told himself it was nothing, just a surprise, that's all. But deep down, something had changed. In that single evening, the balance of power between them had quietly shifted. He just didn't know it yet. And as Elena wiped the piano keys before closing the lid again, she whispered softly to herself, "Thank you, Papa." The house returned to its usual silence. But somewhere inside, the echo of her music still lingered, haunting, beautiful, unforgettable. The next morning, the mansion was unusually quiet. The party had ended late, and most of the guests had already left by the time the sun rose. The smell of wine and perfume still lingered faintly in the air, mixing with the scent of fresh polish that Elena had used to clean the marble floors. She moved carefully from room to room, picking up glasses, wiping down surfaces, and trying not to think about the night before, but she couldn't stop replaying it in her mind. The music, the applause, and the strange silence that had followed when Mr. Callahan just stared at her. She had not meant to draw attention to herself. She had tried to keep her life quiet, hidden in the background where no one would look too closely. But the moment she touched those keys, something inside her had woken up, something she thought she had buried long ago. As she cleaned the piano room, her fingers brushed over the keys again, lightly. They felt smooth and familiar. She smiled faintly, remembering how the notes had come to her as if they had been waiting for her all these years. Back to work. she whispered to herself, and gently closed the lid again. But as she turned to leave, she froze. Mr. Callahan was standing in the doorway watching her. He wasn't dressed like the night before. No fine suit, no polished shoes. Just a simple shirt with the sleeves rolled up, his hair slightly out of place. He looked different, less like the untouchable man she worked for, and more like someone thinking too much. "You start early," he said in a calm tone. "Yes, sir," she replied, lowering her eyes. There was still cleaning to do after last night. He walked slowly into the room, his shoes making soft sounds on the floor. "You played well," he said after a pause. "Better than I expected." "Thank you, sir," she said quietly. He stopped near the piano and looked at it for a moment before turning to her. "You said last night you haven't played in years. Why is that?" Elena hesitated. She wasn't sure how much to say. "Life changed, sir," she answered finally. "My family couldn't afford much after my father passed away. I had to work. Playing the piano doesn't feed a family." Mr. Callahan looked at her for a long moment, saying nothing. There was something thoughtful in his eyes, something she hadn't seen before. "You studied music formally, didn't you?" She nodded slowly. "I did. For a short while. I had a scholarship, but I couldn't finish. I left before my final year." He rested his hand lightly on the piano. "That's unfortunate," he said quietly. "You have a gift." Elena didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to hearing compliments from him, or from anyone for that matter. She simply nodded and turned back to her cleaning. "You can continue to play in the evenings if you wish," he said suddenly. She looked up in surprise. "Sir?" He gave a small shrug. "This piano has been sitting here collecting dust. If you want to use it, but only after you finish your work." Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came. She wasn't sure if it was kindness or just another order disguised as permission. Still, she managed a soft, "Thank you, sir." He gave a short nod and left the room. That night, after finishing her chores, Elena found herself standing in front of the piano again. The house was quiet, the lights dim. She sat down and began to play softly, just for herself this time. The music filled the empty hall, gentle and calm. For the first time in years, she felt peace. Unbeknownst to her, Mr. Callahan was standing outside the doorway, listening. His face was unreadable, but his eyes softened slightly. He didn't understand why her playing affected him so deeply. There was something honest in it, something that made him remember things he'd rather forget. The next few days passed quietly. Elena continued her work, and every night, she would play for a little while before going to bed. Sometimes the music was light and cheerful, sometimes sad and heavy like memories speaking through sound. One afternoon, as she was dusting the library shelves, Mr. Callahan called her name. "Elena, come here for a moment." She put down her cloth and approached carefully. He handed her a small music book. "I found this in one of the boxes in the attic," he said. "I thought you might like it." She took it with both hands, almost afraid to touch it. It was an old piano collection, classical pieces she used to practice when she was younger. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice low but full of emotion. He nodded, pretending not to notice the sparkle in her eyes. "You can practice those in your free time. The house is too quiet anyway." That evening, she played one of the pieces from the book. The melody drifted through the halls like warm light, gentle and beautiful. The maids passing by paused to listen. Even the cook in the kitchen smiled as the sound reached her. One by one, the servants began to stay near the door, just to hear her play after their shifts. It became a small routine in the mansion, Elena's music ending each day with calm and beauty. But not everyone was pleased. One of the senior housekeepers, a strict woman named Mrs. Hodge, frowned when she saw Elena at the piano again. "You're getting too comfortable," she said one evening. "Don't forget you're here to work, not perform." Elena smiled politely. "Yes, ma'am, I only play when my duties are finished." "Be careful," Mrs. Hodge said coldly. "You don't want the master to think you're trying to draw attention." Elena said nothing. She just nodded and continued her work. But deep down, she couldn't help feeling uneasy. Later that week, Mr. Callahan had a few business guests over again. This time, Elena was careful to stay out of sight. She didn't want another scene like before. But as the evening went on, she heard one of the guests mention the piano. "Callahan," the man said with a laugh, "someone told me your maid plays better than most professionals. Is that true?" Mr. Callahan smiled faintly. "You'll have to hear it for yourself," he replied. Then, looking around, he spotted her. "Elena, would you mind playing something for us?" Her heart jumped. "Sir, don't be shy," he said with a lighter tone this time, not the mocking one from before. "Go on." She hesitated, but seeing the calm in his face, she obeyed. She sat at the piano and began to play a soft tune, gentle and light, filling the room with warmth. The guests grew quiet almost immediately. When she finished, there was polite applause, and one of the men said, "Remarkable. You should have her perform more often." Callahan gave a small smile. "Perhaps I will." Elena looked down, unsure how to react. But she noticed something different this time. He wasn't mocking her. He seemed genuinely proud. After the guests left, he approached her. "You handled yourself well," he said. "You made a good impression." "Thank you, sir," she replied quietly. "You could have been a professional pianist," he said after a pause. "You still could, you know." She shook her head, a small, sad smile on her lips. "It's too late for that. Life doesn't stop to wait for dreams." He didn't respond right away. "Maybe not," he said finally. "But sometimes life gives us a second chance. You shouldn't waste it." That night, Elena lay in her small room, unable to sleep. His words echoed in her mind. A second chance. Could she really have one? Or was that kind of hope dangerous? She looked at her hands. They were rough from cleaning, but when she closed her eyes, she could still feel the piano keys under her fingertips. In another part of the house, Mr. Callahan sat by his desk, staring at an old photograph of himself with his family. There was a piano in the background, his late mother's piano. She had loved music, just like Elena. It had been years since he had thought about her. Maybe that was why Elena's playing had struck him so deeply. It reminded him of something pure, something lost. He sighed, setting the picture down. "Maybe she's right," he muttered to himself. "Maybe life doesn't wait." But even as he said it, he knew he was planning something that might change both their lives again. And downstairs, as the house grew silent, Elena whispered softly to herself, "If I could only play for myself again, just once more, freely." Her words faded into the quiet night, but somewhere, in the grand halls, the echoes of her music still lived, gentle, haunting, and full of promise. Days turned into weeks, and the mansion seemed different now. The air that once felt cold and heavy had grown lighter somehow. Every evening, when Elena sat at the piano, the house filled with warmth and calm. Even the workers who had always spoken in whispers began to move more freely, smiling a little more than before. Music had changed everything. Mr. Callahan, though still proud and reserved, had begun to notice things he never cared about before. He noticed how quiet the house was when she didn't play. He noticed how peaceful it felt when she did. And more than once he found himself standing outside the door just listening. He never told her, but he listened almost every night. One morning he called Elena into his study. She entered nervously, wiping her hands on her apron. The study was a grand room filled with books, sunlight spilling through the large windows. He was standing near the desk holding a letter. "You've been here nearly a year now, haven't you?" he said without looking up. "Yes, sir," she answered softly. He nodded. "I've been thinking about something." Her heart raced. Usually when he said that, it meant more work or some new rule. He turned to face her. "Do you still have any connection to the music school you once attended?" She blinked in surprise. "The conservatory, sir?" "No, I left years ago. They wouldn't even remember me now." "I'm not so sure," he said. "I made some inquiries." "Inquiries?" She repeated, confused. He handed her the letter. They still have your records. I contacted them this week. She froze. The paper trembled slightly in her hand as she read. It was from the same music conservatory she had dreamed of returning to, the one she had left when her father died. The letter said she could reapply for their program if she wished, and that someone had already offered to cover the tuition. She looked up, stunned. Sir, this can't be. I made arrangements, he said simply. You shouldn't waste your talent cleaning floors. Elena's mouth opened, but no words came out. Sir, I can't accept this. You've already given me work and a place to live. I can't take more. This isn't charity, he said firmly. It's an investment in something worthwhile. You're talented. You should be doing something meaningful with it. Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them away. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it, he replied. She nodded slowly, clutching the letter to her chest. I will. When she left the study, her heart was pounding. The idea of returning to the conservatory felt like a dream, something too far, too bright to reach. But now it was suddenly real. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay awake in her small room, staring at the ceiling, the letter beside her on the table. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, but another part was afraid. What if she wasn't good enough anymore? What if she failed? And deeper still, there was another fear. What would happen if she left? This mansion, this strange, cold, kind man who had given her a second chance. What would become of it all? The next evening, when she played, her music was different. It was filled with questions, longing, and uncertainty. Callahan noticed it right away. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching her. When she finished, she looked up, startled to see him there. You're thinking too much, he said quietly. She smiled faintly. Maybe I am. About the offer? She nodded. It feels too big, too far from who I am now. He walked into the room and stood near the piano. I used to think like that, he said. When I took over my father's business, I felt trapped. I didn't think I could handle it. But sometimes life doesn't give you choices, it gives you chances. The only mistake is not taking them. His voice was softer than usual, almost personal. Elena looked at him surprised. You really think I should go? He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Yes, you belong on a stage, not in this house. Her chest tightened. And what about the work here? I'll manage, he said with a faint smile. The house might be quieter, but maybe that will teach me something too. There was a long silence. Then she said quietly, Thank you, sir. For everything. He gave a small nod, and for a brief second his usual stern expression faded. You don't owe me thanks. Just promise me one thing, don't stop playing. I won't, she said. In the days that followed, the house was filled with preparations. Elena's departure became the talk among the staff. Some were happy for her, others jealous or worried. Mrs. Hodge, the strict housekeeper, pulled her aside one afternoon. Be careful, she said sharply. People like him don't help others without reason. Don't trust everything you see. Elena didn't reply. She had heard similar warnings before, but she had also seen the small changes in him. The quiet moments when he looked thoughtful, almost human. A week later, her bags were packed. The carriage was ready outside. Mr. Callahan stood by the doorway, hands behind his back, expression unreadable. You're sure about this? He asked. She nodded. Yes, sir. I think it's time. He handed her a small envelope. This should cover your first few months. Don't argue, she smiled faintly. You always win, don't you? He almost smiled back. Not always. For a moment, they just stood there looking at each other. There was respect now, something that had never been there before. Then she said softly, I'll come back one day. I promise. I'll hold you to that, he said. As the carriage rolled away, he watched until it disappeared down the long path. The mansion felt emptier than ever before. That evening, for the first time in months, there was no music in the house. The silence was heavy, almost painful. He walked to the piano and touched the keys gently. The sound that came out was flat and lifeless. He smiled sadly. I suppose it's not the piano that makes the music, he murmured. Meanwhile, at the conservatory, Elena arrived trembling with excitement and fear. The tall gates, the echo of footsteps, the faint smell of varnish and paper. It was all the same as she remembered. She met the head instructor, who greeted her warmly. "We're glad to have you back, Elena. We remember your father well. He was proud of you." Her eyes filled with tears, but she managed to smile. "Thank you. I'll do my best." Her days soon became full. Classes, practice sessions, performances. It wasn't easy. Years of working had made her hands rough, and her confidence had faded. But each time she sat at the piano, she remembered Mr. Callahan's words. "Don't stop playing." Back at the mansion, life went on. Callahan worked longer hours, burying himself in business meetings and papers, but every night he found himself sitting near the piano, staring at the empty bench. Sometimes he imagined he could still hear her playing, soft and distant, like an echo from a memory. One evening, a letter arrived. It was from Elena. She wrote about her classes, the people she'd met, the pieces she was learning. She said she was nervous but happy, and that she would never have been there without his help. At the bottom she added, "I hope the house isn't too quiet without me. If it is, play something." Even a single note can remind us that life still moves forward. He smiled as he read it. For a long moment he just sat there holding the letter. Then, almost without thinking, he sat down at the piano. His fingers pressed one key, then another. The sound was uneven, awkward. But he kept going. Somewhere far away, Elena was practicing in her new room, and though she didn't know it at that exact moment, two pianos played the same simple melody, one in the grand mansion, one in the small music hall, and somehow through that music, they were both connected again. The weeks passed quickly, and Elena was slowly settling into her life at the conservatory. Every day was a challenge. The lessons were harder than she remembered, her fingers not as nimble as they had been, and the other students were often talented in ways she had forgotten existed. At first she doubted herself constantly, afraid she would never measure up. But each time she played, something inside her grew stronger, a reminder of the music she had always carried. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, life had also shifted. Mr. Callahan found the emptiness of the house almost unbearable. The rooms echoed without the soft notes of Elena's piano, and even his work, which had always consumed him, felt dull and lifeless. He began to notice small things he had ignored for years. The way the curtains swayed in the wind, the sound of rain against the windows, the smell of polished wood. He realized something important. Life was richer when shared with others, when beauty existed not just as a trophy or decoration but as something alive. Elena's music had reminded him of that, and now without it the house felt hollow. One evening he found himself standing in the piano room once more. The instrument gleamed under the soft light, untouched since she had left. He placed his hand on the keys, hesitated, and pressed a note. It sounded weak, awkward, and incomplete. He sighed. "It's not just the keys," he murmured. "It's the player." That night he made a decision. He would not let this chance slip away. He needed to see Elena, not just as a distant musician but as someone whose talent had reminded him of life's possibilities. The next morning, he sent a letter to the conservatory, requesting a meeting with Elena and the head instructor. The letter was formal but polite, expressing admiration for her dedication and offering continued support. Elena received the letter while practicing a complex piece, her hands trembling with the difficulty of the notes. When she read it, she paused and stared at the page, her mind racing. The letter spoke of encouragement, of recognition, and of someone believing in her when she had doubted herself. She felt a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. The thought of returning to the mansion, even briefly, made her nervous. Would he still see her as a servant? Or had the respect he had begun to show truly grown? Finally, after much thought, she decided to visit. She informed the conservatory that she would be leaving for a day, explaining the situation, and made her way back to the mansion. The journey brought a flood of memories. Her first days working there, the night she had been forced to play, the quiet evenings when she had practiced just for herself. When she arrived, the mansion felt different. The halls were quieter, but there was a subtle warmth in the way the sunlight fell on the polished floors. Mr. Callahan greeted her at the door, his expression softer than she remembered. "Welcome back," he said simply. She smiled faintly. "It's good to be back, sir." He led her to the piano room. "I wanted to hear you play again," he said. "Not for the guests, not for show. Just for me." Elena hesitated, but the sincerity in his voice convinced her. She sat at the piano, her fingers brushing the keys. For a moment she felt nervous, unsure if her music could bridge the gap between her past and present. Then she began to play. The melody flowed, gentle at first, then growing in strength and confidence. Each note was filled with emotion, telling a story of struggle, hope, and resilience. Callahan listened silently, the lines on his face softening. When she finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke. "You've grown," he said simply. "Not just as a musician, but as a person." Elena looked up, surprised. "Sir," he held up a hand. "Don't thank me. You earned this. You've worked hard and your talent deserves recognition." For the first time, she felt truly seen, not as a servant, not as a novice, but as the artist she had always been. Over the following days, a new relationship began to form between them. Callahan became more than a patron. He became a supporter and mentor, guiding her with encouragement rather than orders. He would ask about her lessons, attend small performances, and provide resources that helped her grow. In turn, Elena shared her music, her thoughts, and her dreams. The mansion, once a place of strict rules and cold walls, began to feel alive again. Music drifted through the halls, laughter returned among the staff, and the heavy air was replaced with energy and hope. One afternoon, Callahan and Elena sat together in the study. She was practicing a new piece she had learned at the conservatory, and he watched quietly, noticing every detail of her hands, the way her body moved with the music, the intensity in her eyes. "You've changed," he said softly. She smiled. "I had to. I couldn't stay the same and move forward." He nodded. "And yet I feel like I've changed too. You've reminded me of something I had forgotten." Elena looked at him curiously. "What's that?" "That life isn't just about wealth or power," he said. "It's about moments, experiences, and people who make you feel alive." He reminded me of that. For a moment there was silence between them, filled only by the faint sound of the piano as she played. Then she stopped and looked at him. "Sir," she said gently, "I never expected to find someone who would believe in me like this. You've given me more than I can explain." He smiled faintly. "And you've given me more than you know." From that day forward, the piano became a bridge between them. Callahan encouraged her to play regularly, not just for him or the staff, but for herself. He began inviting close friends and musicians to hear her, carefully chosen so that she could share her talent without feeling pressured. Elena's confidence grew. She began performing more complex pieces, experimenting with her style, and even composing small original works. Each day she felt more alive, more connected to her dream, and more in control of her own life. Callahan, for his part, learned to listen, not just to the music, but to the people around him. He began to value contributions beyond wealth and status, recognizing the beauty in effort, dedication, and sincerity. One evening, as they sat together in the piano room, Elena looked at him and said, "I never thought I'd feel this at peace. Not after everything that's happened." He nodded. "It's strange how life works. Sometimes it takes being forced to do something you don't want to see the value you never expected." She laughed softly. "And sometimes it takes someone believing in you to realize your own worth." He smiled, a rare warmth in his eyes. "Exactly." Their bond grew, not as employer and servant, not as teacher and student, but as two people who had found mutual respect, understanding, and inspiration. Music was the common language that connected them, allowing them to share thoughts and emotions words could never express. As the weeks turned into months, Elena's skill became undeniable. She was invited to perform at small local events, and word of her talent began to spread. Callahan supported her fully, attending every performance he could, proud not of the recognition she received, but of the courage and dedication she displayed. Elena never forgot the moment he had first forced her to play the piano, the night that had seemed humiliating at first. She realized it had been a turning point, a moment that had pushed her to remember who she was, even when the world seemed to have forgotten. Callahan, in turn, never forgot the music itself, the way it had touched him, softened him, and reminded him of life beyond money and control. He often thought that if he had never heard her play, he might still be trapped in the emptiness of his own world. Together, they learned that true value in life was not in wealth or power, but in talent nurtured, in dreams pursued, and in the courage to embrace both. And through music, they discovered something neither had expected, a connection deeper than friendship, stronger than obligation, and lasting longer than fear. Months passed, and Elena had grown stronger, more confident, and more alive than she had in years. Her days were filled with music, practice, and learning, while her nights were peaceful and full of hope. Every note she played seemed to carry not only her talent, but also the story of her past, the struggles, the sacrifices, and the courage she had discovered within herself. The conservatory had become a second home, and her instructors began to recognize the depth of her skill and her ability to connect with the music. Students who had once seemed intimidating now looked to her for inspiration, and she never hesitated to help those who struggled, sharing the kindness and encouragement she had received. Back at the mansion, Mr. Callahan continued his life of business and responsibilities, but he was different now. He still commanded respect, but the fear and coldness that had once surrounded him had softened. He would often pause in the halls, imagining Elena playing in the distant rooms, and he would smile quietly to himself. The piano room, once empty and silent, now held a memory of her presence that lingered in the air like a gentle promise. One afternoon, a letter arrived at the conservatory. It was an invitation for Elena to perform at a grand concert in the city. This was no ordinary performance. It was an opportunity for talented musicians to showcase their skills to an audience of prominent patrons, critics, and music lovers. Elena held the letter in her hands, her heart pounding. This was the moment she had worked toward, the chance she had never dared to imagine. She knew immediately she wanted to accept, but doubt crept in, whispering fears of failure, of not being enough. Then she thought of the first time she had been forced to play in the mansion, of the smirk on Mr. Callahan's face and the silent awe that had followed. She realized that she owed it to herself to try, to let her music be heard, to prove not just to others but to herself that her talent had value. When she told Mr. Callahan about the concert, he studied her carefully. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, his tone serious but gentle. Elena nodded. "I think so, sir. I want to do this." He leaned back, considering her words. "Good. You've come a long way. I'll be there, of course. You won't be alone." On the evening of the concert, the hall was filled with people, the chandeliers casting golden light across polished floors. Elena's heart raced as she waited behind the stage curtain. She could hear the audience murmuring, the rustle of programs, the soft tuning of instruments. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, remembering every lesson, every practice session, every night she had spent playing for herself in quiet rooms. When it was her turn, she stepped onto the stage, the spotlight warming her face. The audience fell silent as she approached the piano. She placed her fingers on the keys, and for a moment nothing else existed. No fear, no doubt, no past mistakes. Only the music flowing through her, pure and real. Her first notes were soft, delicate, like sunlight touching a still lake. Then as she continued, the music grew in strength, full of emotion, carrying stories of longing, struggle, and hope. Every note she played told the audience who she was, where she had come from, and the courage that had brought her there. The audience listened in silence, captivated by the honesty of her performance. Critics leaned forward, their eyes wide, as they sensed something rare in her playing. This was not just technical skill. It was passion, life, and heart poured into sound. When she finished, there was a pause, a moment of stillness, as if the room itself held its breath. Then applause erupted, thunderous, unrestrained, heartfelt. People stood, clapping, cheering, some even wiping tears from their eyes. Elena rose from the piano, bowing gracefully, her hands shaking, her heart full. From the audience, Mr. Callahan stood, a proud smile on his face, clapping louder than anyone else. He had watched her grow from a quiet, uncertain young woman into a musician, capable of commanding the attention and admiration of a grand hall. After the performance, people came to congratulate her. Some offered contracts, others invitations to perform at further events, and a few simply spoke words of admiration and gratitude for sharing such genuine music. Elena smiled politely, but her thoughts were with the man who had first forced her to play, who had given her the chance to rediscover herself. Later that evening, backstage, she received a note from Mr. Callahan. It read, "I always knew you could do it. This is only the beginning. Never stop playing, never stop believing in yourself." She held the note close, feeling warmth spread through her chest. This man, once distant and cold, had become a part of her journey in a way she could never forget. In the days following the concert, Elena's life continued to evolve. She received more invitations, more opportunities, and began to perform regularly, her confidence growing with each note. Yet she never forgot the quiet rooms of the mansion, the first hesitant touches of the piano keys, and the moments when she had doubted herself the most. Meanwhile, Mr. Callahan returned to the mansion, but it no longer felt empty. He would occasionally sit at the piano, pressing a few notes, remembering the music that had transformed both their lives. The staff noticed a change in him too. He was kinder, more patient, and more willing to listen. The mansion, once a place of strict rules and silent tension, had become a place of warmth, memories, and hope. One afternoon, Elena returned to the mansion for a visit. She walked through the familiar halls, noticing how quiet they had grown without her constant playing. She approached the piano room where Mr. Callahan waited, seated at the desk, papers pushed aside. "You've returned," he said, his tone neutral, but his eyes softened. "I wanted to," she said. "I wanted to play for you again." She sat at the piano, her fingers brushing the keys, remembering the first time she had been forced to play and how far she had come since then. When she began, the music was not only beautiful but confident, alive, and full of the heart she had discovered over the past months. Callahan listened quietly, allowing the notes to fill the room, to fill the spaces of time and memory that had existed between them. When the last note lingered and faded, he remained seated for a moment, silent, then spoke with genuine admiration.